Some people die young, but never truly leave Hollywood. On screen, they were symbols of youth, beauty, and light. Off-screen, a chain of accidents, dreams, and eerie coincidences followed them like a curse. The car that killed James Dean went on to take more lives. Natalie Wood's ghost still drifts over the dark water she feared. They were adored for their perfection, yet haunted by the very roles that made them immortal. They lived under the spotlight and died beneath it too. Tonight, we reopen the forgotten files where glamour meets death and fame turns into something colder, and the final name on this list will make you wonder, does Hollywood ever let anyone rest in peace? Chapter 1. James Dean, the man who died twice. James Dean was 24 when he crashed his silver Porsche Spyder on a lonely California highway. The newspapers called it fate, but for those who knew him, it felt more like a curse fulfilling itself. In the months before his death, Dean spoke often about speed, not as thrill, but as destiny. He told friends he dreamed of losing control on the road. Mechanics warned him the Porsche had bad energy. He laughed, named it Little Bastard, and took it to Selena's. A few days later, he was gone, body broken, fame immortalized. But the car didn't stop there. Pieces of Little Bastard were sold as curiosities. The engine went to a racing driver, who later crashed and died. The car's shell, displayed at a safety exhibition, fell and crushed a visitor. Even the truck transporting it once skidded off the road. Every part of that car seemed to carry his unfinished story. People began whispering that Dean had not just died in the crash, he had multiplied inside it. At Warner Bros., the atmosphere turned uneasy. Real editors said lights flickered whenever Rebel Without a Cause footage was played. In Dean's dressing room, the mirror cracked along the middle weeks after his death. Some called it coincidence, others refused to enter. His friend Dennis Hopper later said, "Jimmy never really left. He's still driving somewhere, just faster than us." Dean's legend became a kind of haunting, not ghostly, but cinematic. Every young actor who tried to imitate him seemed to meet trouble. Crashes, overdoses, disappearances. The same posture, the same smirk, and the same shadow behind the eyes. He became a pattern. Hollywood couldn't escape. They buried him in Indiana, yet fans said the wind near Salinas still sounded like an engine shifting gears, a star who wanted to burn bright, and ended up burning through the line between life and myth. And if James Dean's ghost still drives on that highway, the next name proves some stars never even make it back to shore. Chapter 2. Natalie Wood, The Ocean's Secret. Natalie Wood was Hollywood's porcelain doll, small, perfect, untouchable, but every doll cracks. Behind the eyes that glimmered on screen was a woman who feared the dark, the water, and the silence between applause. She had spoken about it all her life, that she would die in water. Friends remembered how she refused to swim, how she trembled even stepping onto a boat. Yet, in November 1981, she boarded the yacht Splendor with her husband Robert Wagner and actor Christopher Walken. The sea was calm, but tension rippled under the surface. Witnesses on Catalina Island heard voices, breaking glass, a woman's scream, then nothing, only the sound of water swallowing light. Her body was found hours later, floating face down, dressed in a red nightgown and a thin jacket. No shoes, no lifeboat missing. The coroner wrote accidental drowning. But the bruises, too many, too dark, told a different story. The autopsy showed scratches on her arms, a gash on her cheek, and alcohol in her blood. The dinghy she supposedly tried to untie was still tied when police arrived. Hollywood mourned, but it also whispered. The yacht was cleaned before investigators came. Wagner changed his story 3 times. Walken said nothing. The last words heard on that night, "We're not going to fight anymore, are we?" floated through every retelling, like an unfinished script. The tabloids called it tragedy. Those who knew her called it prophecy. Her fear of water had followed her since Splendor in the grass. She once told an interviewer, "If I ever die, it'll be in dark water. I know it." A lifetime later, she did. And the ocean kept its promise. Today, the Splendor still drifts, in private docks repainted, renamed, but heavy with memory. Fishermen say when the fog rolls in, you can hear soft knocking from below the hull, like someone asking to come back on board. Natalie Wood never escaped her fear. She became part of it. And if the ocean claimed her voice, the next story belongs to a man who tried to bury his own and failed. Chapter 3. Bela Lugosi, the vampire who never slept. Bela Lugosi was not born in Hollywood. He came from the mists of Transylvania, or so the world liked to believe. In truth, he was a Hungarian actor who played death too well, and could never leave the coffin behind. When Dracula premiered in 1931, He became the face of horror, pale skin, hypnotic eyes, voice thick as velvet, and decay. Audiences screamed, he smiled. But offstage, the monster began to feed on him. Lugosi slept in the day, stayed awake at night, drank thick black coffee until sunrise. Neighbors saw him walking his garden in a cape, muttering lines from the film. He told them the role had entered his blood. His obsession turned to ritual. He demanded his home be kept dark, curtains nailed shut, mirrors covered. Assistants said he read every script by candlelight, afraid of what daylight might show him. During the White Zombie shoot, he fainted from exhaustion, waking hours later in the same pose Head used in Dracula. Someone joked that he didn't need to act, he just needed to remember. The addiction came next. To silence the insomnia, he turned to morphine, then methadone. Soon his hands trembled, his voice slurred, his eyes hollowed, until he looked more corpse than man. Yet studios still wanted him as the Count. They lined his coffin again and again, and he climbed in without complaint. By the 1950 seconds, he was nearly broke, living in a small Los Angeles apartment filled with props from his films, skulls, crucifixes, and a faded cape. He told a visitor, "The only thing that loves me now is the night." In 1956, Bela Lugosi died alone. Needle marks on his arms, the same cape folded at his side. At his funeral, his friend Peter Lorre whispered to Vincent Price, "Do you think we should drive a stake through him just to be sure?" They buried him in that cape. And some say, Hollywood has never slept peacefully since. For in the shadows of every soundstage, when the lights flicker, someone always says, "He's back." Chapter 4. Montgomery Clift, The Broken Mirror. Montgomery Clift was the man who made pain beautiful. He didn't act emotions, he became them. On screen, he was soft-spoken, fragile, impossibly alive. But behind that quiet face hid 1,000 fractures waiting to split. In 1956, after a dinner at Elizabeth Taylor's house, he drove home along Benedict Canyon. Halfway down, his car struck a telephone pole. His face hit the steering wheel. Teeth shattered, jaw snapped, skin torn open. Taylor was the first to reach him, pulling glass from his mouth as he choked on blood. They said he died that night and was brought back only halfway. After the crash, he became a ghost, trapped inside his own body. Surgeons rebuilt his face, but the symmetry was gone. The left side drooped, one eye seemed lost in time. When he returned to film Raintree County, the camera caught the change, the tremor in his mouth, the stiffness of his movements. Crew members called it the longest suicide in Hollywood history. He hid bottles behind scripts, pills in his jacket, morphine under his bed. Every mirror in his home was covered. Visitors said the air smelled of medicine and sweat. He sat in the dark, curtains drawn, replaying his old films on a projector, watching his former self like a stranger. Sometimes he reached out to the screen, as if touching it could stitch him back together. Elizabeth Taylor never left his side. She said he looked at her like someone drowning looks at air. But love couldn't save him. By the early 60 seconds, he was skeletal, shaking, refusing food. Neighbors heard the projector running all night. When police found him in 1966, the film A Place in the Sun was still flickering against the wall, his young face smiling from another life. He died alone, slumped in a chair, mirrorless, lightless, surrounded by reels of the man he used to be. Montgomery Clift didn't just break his face that night. He cracked the image of Hollywood perfection itself. Chapter 5. George Reeves, the Superman who fell from the sky. George Reeves was supposed to be invincible. He wore the cape, the smile, the promise that truth and justice always win. But when the camera stopped, Superman went home to an empty house and a loaded gun. In the 1950 seconds, Reeves became a national hero through the adventures of Superman. Children wrote letters begging him to save the world. He couldn't even save himself. Typecast, ridiculed, underpaid, he was trapped in a role too big to escape. To the world, he flew. To his friends, he was falling. On June 16, 1959, after a small party in his Benedict Canyon home, guests heard a single shot. They found him upstairs, sprawled on the bed, naked except for a blanket, a .30 caliber Luger between his feet. The police called it suicide, but nothing about the scene made sense. No fingerprints on the gun, 2 bullet holes in the carpet, bruises on his face, a gash near the temple. The guests downstairs said they'd heard laughter, then silence, then a sound like furniture scraping. When detectives arrived, the body had already been moved. The woman he was engaged to had vanished. Rumors grew like mold. Some said Reeves had discovered too much about the studio's finances. Others blamed his affair with Tony Mannix. the wife of MGM executive Eddie Mannix, a man known for making problems disappear. She sent roses to his funeral every year, long after his death. Hollywood called it devotion, the police called it closure. But no one could close the case. Neighbors swore they saw lights flicker in his bedroom weeks later, as if the television had turned itself on. Children visiting his grave left toy capes, and sometimes, when the wind blew, they fluttered upright, as though invisible hands were lifting them. George Reeves became the hero who couldn't land. A man who taught the world to believe in flying, but died proving gravity always wins. Chapter 6. Sharon Tate, the star who saw it coming. Sharon Tate was light, golden, soft, untouched. She moved through Hollywood like something borrowed from heaven, but heaven has a way of calling back what it lends. In 1969, Tate was 26, 8 months pregnant, and the center of Roman Polanski's world. Their home on Cielo Drive was a glass cage of beauty, laughter, music, late-night visits from friends. And then came August, a night so still, even the dogs refused to bark. Earlier that summer, Sharon told friends she had seen it, a shadow at the foot of her bed, a man with a knife, her own reflection on the wall, turning red. They laughed it off as nerves. She smiled, but the fear never left her eyes. Sometimes, she said quietly, I feel something terrible is waiting for me. On the night of August 8th, 4 strangers entered her home, members of the Manson family. They tied, stabbed, and carved their way through the dream that Hollywood had built. By dawn, the house was silent. 5 bodies, 1 unborn child, and a message scrawled in blood on the door. Pig. The news broke like a curse. Reporters called it madness. Polanski flew back from London to find bloodstains where laughter had once been. He walked the rooms in silence, touching the crib that would never be used. The press turned the tragedy into theater, dissecting every detail of her life, her clothes, her innocence. They forgot she had once been a woman, not an omen. Even after the killers were caught, the fear never left. Neighbors moved, friends sold their houses, and Hollywood began locking its doors for the first time. The mansion was torn down, but no one built there for decades. Locals say the air on Cielo Drive still smells faintly of iron and perfume when the wind shifts. Sharon Tate's beauty became a monument to dread the promise that even angels can bleed under California light. She once dreamed of being remembered for her kindness. Hollywood remembered her scream. Chapter 7. Jayne Mansfield, the blonde with the curse. Jayne Mansfield wanted to be bigger than life, and she was. Her laugh could fill a studio, her curves could stop traffic, but when fame is built on desire, it never knows where to stop. She was Hollywood's answer to Marilyn Monroe, louder, brasher, desperate to outshine even death. By the early 60 seconds, her career had cooled. She turned to stage shows, publicity stunts, and strange company. One of those acquaintances was Anton LaVey, founder of the Church of Satan. They met at his black-painted mansion in San Francisco. Photos from that night showed her in a tight gown, a faint smile under the flicker of candles. A few weeks later, LaVey supposedly warned her boyfriend, attorney Sam Brody, leave her or you'll both be destroyed. The tabloids called it nonsense. But the accidents began almost immediately. Cars spinning out on dry roads, tires slashed, engines catching fire for no reason. And still, she laughed showing up to every party in pink, always late, always radiant. June 28, 1967. Highway 90, Louisiana. A fog of insecticide drifted across the road. Jayne, Sam, and 3 of her children were driving through the night when their Buick slammed into the back of a truck. The top of the car sheared off. Jayne was killed instantly. Her children survived, asleep in the back seat. The press went feral. Rumors said she was decapitated. Police denied it, but the story stuck the final grotesque echo of her beauty. Even the trucking industry changed. A safety bar added to every trailer, forever called the Mansfield Bar. After her death, LaVey sent roses and said nothing. Her mansion in Los Angeles was sold. The new owners swore mirrors shattered on their own. Her pink Cadillac remained in storage, its seats still stained with the scent of her perfume and gasoline. Jayne Mansfield lived as a spectacle and died as a warning. She wanted to be unforgettable. And Hollywood granted her wish in the cruelest way possible. Chapter 8. John Barrymore, the body that wouldn't rest. John Barrymore was born into a dynasty of actors and died as Hollywood's favorite ghost. The press called him the Great Profile, a man who could seduce with a single glance. But by the end, his beauty had rotted faster than his fame. He drank more than he breathed. Whiskey in the morning, gin at lunch, brandy for dessert. He performed Shakespeare by day and collapsed in hotel bathtubs by night. By the 1,930 seconds, directors planned their shooting schedules around his hangovers. Assistants kept buckets near the set. One reporter described him as half genius, half decay. On May 29, 1942, Barrymore finally gave out. He died in his chair at 57, the glass still in his hand. Hollywood mourned and then laughed. Because that night, his friends decided death shouldn't interrupt the party. Errol Flynn, always drunk, always dramatic, had Barrymore's body stolen from the morgue. They propped him on a chair in Flynn's living room, lit candles, and poured drinks. When Flynn returned home, he thought the corpse was greeting him. He screamed, dropped his glass, and later called it the funniest night in Hollywood history. To others, it was a desecration, the final act of cruelty toward a man who had already given his body to performance. The corpse was quietly returned before dawn. No charges, no scandal, just whispers. But after that night, those who'd touched him said they couldn't sleep. Flynn claimed he heard footsteps on his stairs for months. Another friend saw Barrymore's reflection in a mirror that had been covered since the prank. No one ever told the story twice, the same way as if repeating it might summon him again. Barrymore's grave sits under the California sun, far from the darkness he lived in. But people who visit say their cameras fail to focus on the stone, as if the lens refuses to look. The man who spent his life performing death was never allowed to rest from it. And if John Barrymore's corpse became a joke, the next woman's death would become an unsolved prayer. Chapter 9. Thelma Todd, the woman in the garage. Thelma Todd was called the Ice Cream Blonde. Bright, charming, a symbol of effortless laughter. She made comedies sparkle in the early 1930 seconds, her voice sharp and sweet like champagne. But laughter in Hollywood is always rented. And hers ran out on a December morning in 1935. At 9 a.m., a maid found her in the garage above a cafe she co-owned on Pacific Coast Highway. The engine of her car was off, but the air was heavy with exhaust. She was slumped over the steering wheel, her face turned slightly toward the window, lips blue from carbon monoxide. The police called it accidental asphyxiation. Hollywood called it murder. The night before, Thelma had attended a party in Beverly Hills, flawless, smiling, wearing white satin gloves. Witnesses said she argued with her ex-lover, director Roland West, who lived in the same building. She left past midnight, heels clicking on the wet pavement, refusing a ride. By dawn, she was dead. The distance between the restaurant and the garage was 270 steep steps, too far, too cold. For a woman in high heels, her face was bruised, her nose slightly broken. Blood on her lips that didn't match the official report. And yet, no signs of struggle were found. The coroner declared it an accident. The studio called it a tragedy. Her mother called it a lie. West never confessed, but he never denied either. He kept living above the same garage, locked in silence, until he died 2 decades later. People who passed the building swore they smelled gasoline when the wind changed, even when no cars were near. The lights flickered every December on the anniversary of her death. No one stayed long. The Thelma Todd's laughter was once Hollywood's favorite, sound fast, bright, contagious. Now, it's just an echo between concrete walls, trapped with the smell of exhaust and the memory of a woman who didn't believe her own ending. And if her death left the air poisoned, the next story takes us deeper into a beauty who turned her own tragedy into theater. Chapter 10. Lupe Velez, the Mexican Tragedy. Lupe Velez lived like a spark struck too close to gasoline. She was the Mexican Spitfire, wild, untamed, the first Latina to conquer Hollywood's golden screens. She laughed too loud, loved too hard, and refused to apologize for either. But in a town that worships control, chaos is never forgiven. By the late 1930 seconds, her career was fading. The studios called her difficult. She called them boring. Her relationship with Austrian actor Harold Marisch was collapsing, and so was her health. Pregnant, unmarried, and cornered by scandal, she told friends she would rather die beautifully than live embarrassed. On December 13, 1944, Lupe dined alone at her home in Beverly Hills, candles, roses, a blue silk gown. She laid out photographs, letters, and sleeping pills in neat rows like stage props. Then she swallowed 70 of them with a glass of brandy. She left a note, "To Harold, may God forgive you and me, but I prefer death to dishonor." The tabloids called it the Mexican Tragedy, but the story they printed wasn't the one she wrote. Police claim they found her body in the bathroom, her head submerged in a toilet, a grotesque, humiliating image that erased the dignity she had planned for herself. Friends insisted it was impossible that she had been moved, that someone wanted the scene rewritten. Hollywood, always hungry for spectacle, chose the uglier version. For years afterward, her mansion stood empty. Neighbors said lights flickered at night, and faint music drifted from the dining room, a single song looping on a broken phonograph. Visitors swore they saw a woman in blue standing near the stairs, perfume thick as jasmine and brandy. Then, as quickly as she appeared, she was gone. Lupe Velez wanted to leave life like a final performance, elegant, cinematic, unforgettable, but the city that devoured her decided to make her ending a punchline. And in doing so, it created a legend more haunting than any ghost. The laughter had faded, the perfume turned sour, and next came a girl who didn't dream of fame, only escape. Chapter 11. Peg Entwistle, the girl who jumped from the H. Peg Entwistle came to Hollywood, chasing the same dream as everyone else, to be seen. She had crossed an ocean for it, leaving London with a suitcase, a stage name, and a fragile faith that talent still mattered. By 1932, she had a single film credit, a rented room on Beechwood Drive, and a view of the new Hollywoodland sign, 13 white letters, promising heaven to anyone who could climb high enough. But the letters were liars. Her studio dropped her. Her agent stopped returning calls. At night, the lights from the sign flickered through her window, like a cruel invitation. Neighbors later said they saw her walking toward the hills at dusk, coat buttoned, face calm. She carried her purse, a note, and nothing else. She reached the base of the sign just after dark. Somewhere between despair and release, she climbed the 50-foot ladder of the H, kicked off her shoes, and jumped. The next morning, a hiker found her body in the brush below, neat, composed, almost peaceful. The note in her purse read, "I am afraid. I am a coward. I am sorry for everything. If I had done this long ago, it would have saved a lot of pain." Ironically, her film, 13 Women, was released days later. Critics praised her brief performance. She didn't live to read the reviews. For years, no one spoke of her. Then the stories began, hikers seeing a woman in 1,930 seconds clothing, walking barefoot near the sign, vanishing into the fog. They say she smells of gardenias, her favorite perfume. Sometimes she stands beneath the H, watching the city shimmer below her, as if still waiting for applause. Peg Entwistle never found fame in life, but Hollywood gave it to her in death. She became the ghost that guards its promise, a reminder that dreams can kill more quietly than guns. And while Peg fell from the top of Hollywood's symbol, the next woman would fade while standing right beneath its lights. Chapter 12. Veronica Lake, the woman who faded away. Veronica Lake was the kind of beauty that made silence fall in a room. The hair, the eyes, the whispering voice, she wasn't real. She was a hallucination in silk. Hollywood turned her into a fantasy, and then punished her for believing it. During the 1,940 seconds, she was untouchable. Paramount sold her image like perfume. The peekaboo blonde, the woman men couldn't look at without looking twice, but fame fades fast under studio lights. She was labeled difficult, unpredictable, alcoholic. When her husband left, the studios followed. By the 1,950 seconds, the goddess was gone, replaced by a woman renting motel rooms under false names, clutching old photographs as proof she had once existed. She worked as a bartender in Manhattan, pouring drinks for men who once worshipped her. Some recognized her and didn't believe it. One asked for an autograph just to prove the joke. She smiled, signed it, and went back to wiping the counter. The lights in the bar were dim enough to be merciful. Her final years were quieter than a rumor. No mansion, no assistants, just a rented room with peeling wallpaper and an empty bottle beside the bed. When she died in 1973, the news barely made the papers. The coroner's report listed cirrhosis of the liver, but the truth was simpler. She drank until she disappeared. The landlord found her body days later, the radio still playing an old big band song she used to dance to. Her ashes were sent to Vermont, then lost for nearly a decade, misplaced, like a forgotten prop from a movie no one rewatched. Someone finally claimed them, though no one's sure who. Even in death, she slipped quietly through the cracks. Veronica Lake once said, "People don't vanish in Hollywood. They just get out of focus." She was right. The camera blinked, and she was gone. A ghost made, not of shadow, but of neglect. And as Veronica dissolved into silence, the next man would die loudly, alone, with the kind of honesty only blood can write. Chapter 13. William Holden, the man who bled in silence. William Holden was the definition of American masculinity. Tall, tan, steady, with a smile that hid too much. He won an Oscar, charmed the world, and drank himself into legend. Hollywood called him reliable. The bottle called him home. By the late 1970s, Holden had become his own ghost. He lived alone in a Los Angeles apartment, curtains drawn, the fridge stocked only with vodka and canned soup. Friends said he stopped answering calls. When he did, his voice was slurred but polite, always promising to come by soon. He never did. He was proud, allergic to pity. He told people he wanted to die standing up. In the end, he almost did. On November 12, 1981, he fell in his apartment, a slip, a cut, a silence. The glass table shattered, slicing his forehead. He didn't call for help. Didn't go to the hospital. He wrapped a towel around the wound and went to bed. He bled through the night. They found him 4 days later, the towel stiff, with dried blood. The radio still playing classical music. The official cause was accidental fall. But no one believed accidents happen that quietly. He had been sober for months, they said. Or maybe just hiding better. The truth lay somewhere between pride and surrender. At his funeral, friends described him as a man who vanished in plain sight. The irony was cruel. A star who spent his life pretending to die beautifully on screen, and in the end, died unseen. His apartment was clean, almost staged. No overturned furniture, no chaos, just the neat geometry of decay. The coroner said it looked like he had gone to sleep, as if waiting for the next take. Hollywood called it tragedy, but really, it was exhaustion, the quiet kind that comes after applause. William Holden bled in silence, not because no one could hear him, but because no one was listening. And if Holden's death was a whisper, the next man's life was a scream, an actor who tried to outpace his own madness until it swallowed him whole. Chapter 14. Robert Walker, the actor who never came back. Robert Walker was supposed to be one of the good ones. Handsome, polite, unassuming. He smiled easily, loved too deeply, and broke faster than anyone saw coming. Hollywood never forgives softness. He was only 32 when Strangers on a Train made him immortal. Hitchcock called him unnervingly real. What the director didn't know was that Walker wasn't acting. The paranoia, the charm, the flicker of madness behind his eyes, all of it was him. His marriage to actress Jennifer Jones had collapsed. She had fallen for producer David O. Selznick, who controlled both their careers. Walker drowned the humiliation in gin and sleeping pills. At parties, head switched from laughter to tears in a heartbeat, his words slurring into nonsense. Friends said being around him felt like standing near a live wire, dangerous but mesmerizing. In August 1951, his psychiatrist visited him at home after a long night of drinking. Walker was agitated, pacing, muttering that people were coming through the walls. The doctor gave him an injection of sodium amytal, a sedative meant to calm him. Minutes later, his breathing slowed, then stopped. By the time the ambulance arrived, he was gone. The studio called it an accident. The coroner said acute intoxication. But no one could explain why the doctor hadn't called for help sooner, or why Selznick ordered his name kept out of the headlines. Walker's mother said her son had been drugged into peace. The newspapers called it a tragic end for a promising star. On set, Hitchcock was filming the final scenes of Strangers on a Train when he heard. He finished the day's shoot, then stood in silence for a full minute. The film went on to become a classic, his face frozen forever, smirking like he knew what was coming. Robert Walker's death was ruled accidental, but everyone knew better. Had been disappearing for years, first from the screen, then from himself. He didn't die at 32. He just stopped finding the way back. And when his story ended, so did the list. Because by then, Hollywood had become its own ghost, a place where light remembers, but nothing truly rests. Hollywood loves to bury its ghosts under new lights, but the ground here never forgets. Every name in this list once glittered across the sky, now they echo beneath it. James Dean's car still kills. Natalie Wood still floats. Bela Lugosi still sleeps in his costume, and the wind around the Hollywood sign still whispers the line Peg and Twistle never got to finish. They were beautiful, fragile, and cursed victims, not of fate, but of the very illusion they helped create. Hollywood feeds on memory, and it never stops eating. Every new star shines because someone else burned first. If these stories unsettled you, tell me which one stayed in your mind the longest. Like, subscribe, and keep your eyes open the next time the lights dim, another ghost might walk in. After all, fame can make you immortal, but immortality never lets you rest.